Welcome to our next class. In this class, I will cover some of the commonly used string and number functions. There are a lot of them. Most of them you may never use. However, there may become a time when you might need one of them for an application you are developing. So let's review string concatenation. Here we see concatenating with the period. And this is how you would need to do it if you're using single quotes. However, when you use double quotes, PHP is allowed to do what is called variable substitution. And what that allows us to do is to actually enclose the variable names within the double quotes, and it will actually interpret the value, known as interpolation. There are two other ways of working with strings in PHP. One is called a here doc, and this is useful for building a long string. What you do is you start with an identifier and the here doc operator, and then you code in your quote in the same way that you would with double quotes, and then the string again ends with the identifier. So this is similar to using the double quotes. Another way is using a now doc, and this allows you to build a multi-line string. However, it does not use variable substitution as does the here doc. And the difference in syntax is that identifier needs to be single quoted. We have looked at escape sequences, and some can be used in most strings. Others need to be inside the double quoted strings. I would like to talk about the htmlentities function, which is very similar to the HTML special chars function. And what these functions do is they convert special characters to HTML character entities. The purpose of this is to prevent cross-site scripting, to prevent someone from injecting malicious code into a text box or a text area. How you can actually see what this function is doing is to go into the view source, and you can actually see that it has indeed changed the HTML characters into entity characters. Although it will look normal in the browser but not in the view source, therefore disabling the execution of this script. Two commonly used string functions, string length and substring. The string length allows us to find out the length or the number of characters. This would be handy in determining things such as password length, working with zip codes, etc. The substring function allows us to return a substring from a string, and this takes two required parameters and a third optional parameter. The string that you will start with, the starting position where you want to start, and the length. In the first example, we would want to be starting at 0 position, extracting 3 characters. The next example, we will be starting at position 4, and since we did not specify a length, it will automatically extract to the end of the string. Another commonly used function is a string position. So if you were looking for a character and you wanted to extract a substring based on that character, this function will come in handy to give you the position to start with. It takes 3 parameters: the string to search, the string you want to find, and an optional start position. This function is very valuable because if the first occurrence is not found, it will return false. Sometimes it is more useful knowing if the string is found or not than where it is. This function was commonly used in validating an email address. For example, do we have an @ sign? And if we didn't have an @ sign, we would know that right off the bat, it is not a valid email address. Another commonly used function is the string replace function. It allows us to find a character and replace it with another one. So here it takes 3 required parameters: the character to find, the character to replace it with, and the string we are searching. So in the example, if we wanted to replace an empty space with a hyphen in this string variable, this would be the syntax to do it. Some other very useful functions. Ltrim for trimming spaces to the left of a string. Rtrim for trimming spaces to the right of the string. Trim for trimming spaces on both sides. You always want to use the trim function when you're returning values from a form. You don't want unnecessary spaces on the right or left because usually these will be put into the database. String padding, we can add padding on a string. LC first allows us to lowercase the first character in the string. UC first allows us to uppercase the first character in the string. UC words allows us to uppercase the first character in every word in the string. String to lower allows us to lowercase the whole string. String to upper allows us to uppercase the whole string. String reverse reverses it. String shuffle allows us to shuffle the order. Some other functions that convert back and forth to ASCII characters. The character CHR function, if we pass it an ASCII value, it will return the character. The ORD ordinal function, if we pass it a character, it will return the ASCII value. There are many ways of assigning integers. You can just use the number. You can put a plus sign in front of the number. You can put a minus sign in front of the number. You can also use parentheses and use minus and plus in combination with those parentheses. There are many ways of assigning a floating point or decimal value. A decimal value must contain a decimal point or it's not a decimal value. Once PHP sees that decimal point, it will interpret it as a decimal value. For example, 3.5. Decimals can be negative. The minute we put that decimal, even if it's a 0 that's following it, it will look at this as a decimal data type. You can start with the decimal and then have numbers after it, or you can have a leading 0. A positive integer with a decimal after it is treated as a decimal data type. You also can assign exponential values to a number, and there are different ways of doing that with just the number, with the plus, with the minus. You can use a 0 exponent. You can have negative numbers with exponents and whole numbers. Some other commonly used mathematical functions. The ABS, absolute function, will return the absolute value. For example, if we pass it a negative number, it would return the absolute value. Ceil rounds the number to the next highest integer. Floor rounds the number to the next lowest integer. Max, if you're an Excel user, this might seem familiar. The max function will return the largest number of a specified comma-delimited list. The min function will return the smallest number of a comma-delimited list. Pi returns pi, mathematical pi. Power allows you to return values of exponents, Round allows you to round a number to a specified number of decimals. So if you didn't want to round it up or down to an integer, you could round it to a decimal. And we have the square root. Two commonly used functions to generate a random number, rand and mt_rand. They essentially do the same thing. mt_rand generates an integer. By the way, these are whole numbers using a specific algorithm which produces a better value and is faster than rand. Here, if you were to just use the function, it would generate the number from 0 probably to maybe a 6-digit value, a random number within a very high range. By passing a minimum and maximum value to either function allows you to obtain a value within that range. So in this example, I am generating a random number between 100 and 999. If you wanted a decimal, you would just divide by 10. The sprintf function, and let me say, this is not the sprintf function. It is pronounced sprintf. And there are other functions similar to this in the PHP language. This function formats a string or number specified by a parameter which indicates the type. So let's take a look at this example. If I were to use the echo statement here, and I have my first name is $f_name and my last name is $l_name, that works well. Variable substitution takes place, the values are returned. However, we could use sprintf, and here is the way it works. The first parameter contains placeholders that are indicated with the percent sign. After the percent sign is the type of data, and that's here we see S for a string. The next two parameters are the values that will be passed. So you're looking at %s as essentially a variable that's taking the place of the parameter f_name, and the second %s is taking the place of parameter l_name. This function can be used within a for each loop to display name-value pairs coming from a form or an array in a nicely formatted manner, such as colon separated, and there is an example in the sample code for that. PHP is a loosely typed language, meaning it interprets the data type based on how it's being used. There are times when we need to change the data type. If you needed to change a data type to an integer, the int_val function. If you needed to change it to a float, we have the float_val function. You also can use what is called typecasting. And let me point out that if you were to pass it a string, what it will do, it will convert the numbers at the beginning of that string, and it will just ignore the rest of the string, such as 42 miles, the result will be 42. I have a supplemental handout that covers the isNumeric function, which you might want to use first before you convert